Welcome to Methods Talk, the podcast from Methods at Manchester. I'm Emma Bannister, the Director of Methods at Manchester. In this episode, we meet Cathy Hamilton, who is a Professor in Consumption, Markets and Society at University of Strathclyde. Cathy has research interests around consumer culture and transformative consumer research, looking at how society interacts with consumer culture and the impacts this can have on individuals and their communities. She's widely published with articles in top marketing journals such as Journal of Consumer Research. Her work also crosses disciplines, with papers appearing in sociology, tourism and policy journals. We will focus on the use of ethics of care in academic research and poetry as method, drawing on some work that Cathy and I have been engaged with together, along with Maria Piacentini from Lancaster University. Through our conversation, we will reflect on our experiences with that work and where it has taken us. We started the conversation with me asking Cathy about the Consumer Research with Impact for Society Special Interest Group, which we co-chair together with Maria and another colleague, Susan Dunnett from University of Edinburgh.
So we established back in 2018 a special interest group within the Academy of Marketing. As you said, it was called Consumer Research with Impact for Society. And I guess really what we wanted to do was create a forum where we could bring together both academics but also non-academic stakeholders who were interested in this kind of research, create a forum for them to share ideas, to share conversations about theoretical issues, methodological issues, and also issues around the pathways to impact. One of the things that we have done since the SIG started in 2018 is run annual workshops at the Academy of Marketing Conference. Each of these workshops, I think, was an opportunity for people to share their experiences, and each year we tried to build on what we had talked about the year before. But then I think we kind of felt there might be an opportunity to do something else. So rather than having each workshop as a standalone activity, we felt there might be an opportunity to develop a more sustained collaboration with some members of the SIG. So I guess then we fast forward to 2021 and the workshop that we ran that year. We had developed our call for papers for the workshop at the end of 2020, which we all know is a year like no other. We had gone through the pandemic, and as well as all of the impacts on a much broader level, we also had impacts from the pandemic on our own identities as academics. We'd had the shift to online teaching, we'd had disruptions to our research projects, and I think we felt that we really wanted to create a space where academics could reflect on these issues. So we created a very open call for researchers within the area of consumer research who were interested in societal impact to think about how their own identities have been impacted by the pandemic. We got a range of submissions, really diverse submissions, but also really honest submissions about the difficult time some people had had. And I think that really showed us that whatever it was that we did, we needed to do something that really had care embedded at the heart.
That's really interesting, because actually during the pandemic, care became almost like a buzzword, didn't it? Mm. There was almost like whether it was clap for carers, there was a lot of attention given to caring. But I remember at that time, we felt that within academia, within our institutions, actually, there hadn't been so much attention given on us as academics necessarily, or conversations around caring for each other. And I think that got us talking also about collaboration as well, didn't it? And I think you, myself, Maria, we'd talked quite a lot about collaboration in the past. We'd always said how lucky we were in terms of the teams that we worked in, and reflected a little bit about how that did work. What were the relationships? What became the kind of relationships where we could work well together? And I think going back to what you said about, this call and different people coming forward, we realised that it was quite a diverse bunch of people. As you said, we'd all had our different kinds of challenges at that time. And I think that became one of the challenges, didn't it? Thinking, how are we going to work together as a collective? Many of us hadn't met before, and how could we almost sort of incorporate the positive things that we knew there were when you collaborate with people, without it sort of turning into something else, because collaborations aren't always positive, are they?
No, like definitely not, and we know that from looking at the literature as well. We know that there are practical challenges. Certainly if you're trying to bring a diverse group of people together and trying to bring together different perspectives, there can be tensions. But there's also, I guess in a sense, within academia, it's a very individualistic career path. We know people do collaborate, but at the end of the day, we're very much judged on our own self-brands. So often collaborations are, I guess, actioned and operationalised with that kind of darker undertone. And that's reflected in the literature. And McFarlane talks about collaboration as cronyism, where he speaks about what he refers to as publication cartels and honorary authorship. And there's also mention of collaboration as parasitism. So whenever more senior academics can almost exploit more junior academics. So despite the fact that we had quite positive experiences, we were aware that didn't happen universally.
I mean, that's quite interesting, isn't it? Because now thinking back, and it seems so long ago, but it wasn't really, was it? Thinking how we came to do what we did. So this is using poetry as kind of a method, really, to kind of encourage collaboration within that group. And I think the the conference, as you had said, had shifted to online, wasn't it? And we were used to, at that point, sort of running in-person workshops for our SIG. And we were really faced with this sort of challenge of how do we build on the very successful work that we had done as a SIG, but kind of convert it to that online environment. And I'm trying to think how we came to using poetry as the tool for that. I mean, I think part of it was, as you know, we've talked about creating that kind of caring space, haven't we? And I think that we wanted to unsettle ourselves in a sense, so that we weren't there as the kind of chairs of the SIG doing something and instructing people in how to do something. We wanted to sort of all be in the same boat in a sense, and almost like provide the space for people to get creative in some way. And we arrived at poetry as something that the three of us had never done and thought it might be quite a fun thing to do, didn't we? It's funny thinking back.
Yeah, and actually your use of the word unsettle, I think it is really resonant, because I remember when we decided we were going to do collaborative poetry and we sent the email around to the rest of the group, we were a little bit hesitant, because the Academy of Marketing is a fairly mainstream conference, so we weren't sure how people were going to react to this suggestion that they were going to do collaborative poetry, but very luckily they embraced it wholeheartedly. But as you said, we were not experts in poetry, let alone collaborative poetry. So what we decided to do was hire a professional facilitator, and we found someone called Dr. Helen Bowden. We found Helen through the Scottish Book Trust author directory, and on there I remember we were looking at various different poets, and Helen's interests were listed as collaborative poetry, but also writing for wellbeing. And I think we thought that chimed really well with what we wanted to achieve at the workshop. And so we'd set up our meeting with Helen. And at that point, I don't think we necessarily knew what kind of collaborative poetry we wanted to do, but Helen talked through a few different options with us, and eventually we ended up with what's called the web of words approach. And I think, if I'm remembering rightly, this one really resonated with us, because the web of words approach, it almost demystifies poetry. So it presents poetry as something that everybody can participate in. So it's not something that's just set apart for people who have expertise on writing or who speak very eloquently. You know, poetry in the web of words format is accessible to everyone. And I think that was quite important to us.
Yeah, and I think that was reflected in our experience of actually using it, wasn't it? And remember, we only had an hour and a half really to work on this poem. Do you think we should read some of the poem?
Yeah, why don't we read some? Shall we read a chorus and a verse each?
Okay, let's do that. Do you want to start?
Okay, I'll start. So our chorus, first of all. Why does every sentence start with I? You're an equal participant, from London or the Shetland Isles. I am not the same person I was. Let there be a we. Bridges. Some bridges are easier to break. Silence, electronic interruption. Then da-da-da-da-da-da, boom. Do we want to use the word lonely? Do we have a novel lonely?
Why does every sentence start with I? You're an equal participant, from London or the Shetland Isles. I am not the same person I was. Let there be a we. I'm not the only one. Anger, powerless, frustrated, fearful, not set up for this eventuality. Anxious days, amid uncertainty, pressure, new ways of being, ways of doing, escape. We will actually provide a link to the full poem in case you would like to have a read of that. But actually, the interesting thing for us is the fact that this poem was a tool. It was a tool for something else, almost like a mechanism for us to come together, wasn't it? And even though, we read that, and I've got so much affection for that poem, but actually the poem in itself, we don't think of it as like a creative masterpiece. It's more what it represents, what the experience meant for us and across the collaboration, really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Like we were all proud of it, but I think we learned some broader lessons from it. So one of the lovely things about this web of words approach is it recognises that every voice is valid. Mm-hmm. As we said before, it's open to everyone. And that means, like, if you follow the link and look at the web of words, you'll see that our verses are quite different in their writing style. They're different in their tone. And that's really different to what we normally see within academic publications, because we normally have this journal article where even if there's multiple authors, it feels really consistent. It feels like it's been written in one voice. Whereas what we had here in the web of words was lots of different voices coming together. Which is something that I think is really nice to reflect on, especially within a collaborative environment, within a collaboration context.
I remember that there was a real temptation, wasn't there, to go back and kind of try and make it more uniform or perhaps correct things. And Helen was really kind of quite strict with us, which was good, that no, the words should stand as they were sort of written. And I think, I've taken that, with sort of research supervisions or even in other writing, actually sort of thinking twice before sort of attempting to change people's voice, actually. So it gave us a lot to think about, really, didn't it? But I think also what was really quite interesting was the sort of impact that working together on that poem had on us. We had like a follow-up workshop to come back together, which ended up being really important, didn't it, where we sort of reflected on the whole experience, and people found it really quite emotional, didn't they? And I remember one person saying, I'm not the same person I was 2 days ago. And that's just really
so powerful.
Yeah. I sort of wondered, we replicated it. Well, we sort of ran something similar quite recently, didn't we, Kathy?
Yeah, we did. We ran another workshop with PGR researchers at University of Manchester. And this one, again, it was based on collaborative poetry. And the prompt that we set this time was really just very open reflection on the PhD journey. And what was interesting about this one is that we had two different perspectives with the people in the workshop. So we had the supervisor perspective, which we could provide, but we also had the perspective of the postgraduate researcher. And I remember, like, one of the things I was really interested in is whether this experience would be as memorable and as emotional as what the first workshop had been, because, as we said, that had taken place at the height of the pandemic. We had, spent a year on Zoom, and I wondered, would we still get some of the same benefits from it when we ran it much more recently? But we did, we absolutely did. The poem that we ended up creating together, we ended up calling it Making Human Connections. And that came from a comment somebody made when we were in the workshop together, and I think that really epitomises what we can do with this approach. It's a way of connecting people.
I mean, I think it shows more broadly the sort of the use of more creative approaches in research and sort of more arts-based methods, and the kind of differences they can make. You know, sort of often, I mean, I guess in our research we've often used interviews, haven't we, fairly regular methods like focus groups, and I think for me it's opened my eyes up to sort of thinking about things differently. I've always sort of thought that perhaps creative methods could be a little bit intimidating, but actually it was almost the opposite, wasn't it?
It was a real kind of leveler, because as we said at the beginning, like, this was quite a diverse group. It had people who had been in academia quite a long time, established professors, but also people who were still doing their PhD, people who were early career researchers. But for all of us, it was a new method, so that we were essentially all in the same boat from that point of view. None of us had experienced it before. So I think having that leveling of any hierarchy was really important. And the arts method, I think another real benefit of it was it really felt that it helped us establish trust within our group very quickly. We know that trust is important to any collaboration, but often when we think about trust, we see it as something that takes quite a lot of time to develop. So we might think, well, that's a great collaboration, like they've been working together for 4 or 5 years and that trust is really developed. But we felt that using these arts-based methods really catalysed that formation of trust. And I suppose that's maybe because we had to be quite open with each other, and we had to share our vulnerability, share our experiences, and that really bonded the group together.
I suppose sort of thinking about it now, an obvious question would be kind of where to now, and where does this take us? You know, what does this mean in practice outside of those kind of contexts? You know, has it had an impact on your work?
Like, I think one of the things I suppose we've been talking about together a little bit is kind of the link between an ethics of care approach and just in general the relationships that we have within academia. Like, we have relationships with our students, we have supervision relationships, and the importance of really bringing a caring approach to all of those, you know, how valuable that can be for the people involved. So I think that's definitely one of the takeaways that I have from the project is kind of having that ethics of care lens in approaching all the different kinds of relationships that we have, not just the collaboration as we focused on, but the relationships much more broadly. So whether it be within our own institutions or beyond that.
And I guess the importance of relationships, so much of what we do is based on relationships, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think, you know, we're qualitative researchers, particularly when we're doing qualitative work. I think relationships are really important. We have relationships with our participants, you know, we get to know them on a deeper level. We also have relationships with non-academic partners, you know, whether that be a charity or an organisation that we might be working with. And, you know, if we can approach all of those relationships with an ethics of care approach, then I think that's a really good lesson to take from the project.
That sounds like, or seems like, a very good note to end on, Kathy. I hope that's given your food for thought. I've certainly really enjoyed reflecting on our experiences and hearing more from you, Kathy. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.